Welcome to History of Turrican. Before we begin this episode, I should point out that I didn't mention the Sega Mega Drive / Genesis release in the preview, but it will be included. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. Title. Now, when we left off last time, we'd just come up to the year 1990. This is the year when the first Turrican game was released. I'll be going through the game world by world, and highlighting a system for each world. Let us begin at the beginning with World 1. The outside. This is where you begin, finding yourself on a rock and negotiating walkers, radar posts, mushroom drones, bats and spikes, as well as the occasional giant fist or lemon-throwing mothership. Luckily for you, an unknown benefactor has hidden blocks in the landscape that contain all you need to power up your suit and take the fight to the monstrous Morgul. This world is the best known among some players, because not everyone is a die-hard joystick jockey, and some people are born explorers. World 1 has many secret caverns, filled with goodies and extras, but there's often only one way to the all-important exit. The score, composed by Chris Hulsbeck, is, in my own opinion, driving and urgent, while also evocative of the sparseness of the environment. It carries over quite well in most of the ports where it's used, but we'll get to that later.
Featured system, Commodore Amiga.
The Commodore Amiga version of Turrican can be called the definitive 16-bit version because Factor 5's development is closely tied to the development of Trenz's own Commodore 64 version. The graphics are smooth, colourful and brimming with character. This is where the power of the Amiga's sound processor, named Paula, can be demonstrated. Hulsbeck used a 7-voice software routine, pioneered by German programmer Jochen Hippel, to get around the Amiga's 4-voice hardware limit and showcase the talents of this chip. Inside the sewer tunnels of Morgul's complex, gun emplacements, compactor teeth, spiky balls, and flying wall blocks all want to stop you from getting any further. Lucky for you then, that the blocks get bigger and may even contain an extra life or two, if you're lucky. Then again, you will have to do battle with a giant fish and a very nasty looking trash compactor before this world is behind you. There's more of a feeling of claustrophobia in these levels, and the secret areas and hidden things are fewer and further between, though in their place are a mountain of diamonds. Remember folks, 300 diamonds earns you an extra continue.
Featured system, Sinclair ZX Spectrum.
Ported to the Spectrum by Probe Design, this version of Turrican is both a good and bad thing. On one hand, the game is nothing short of a technological miracle, and a real slap in the face to the C64 owners who boasted that Turrican would never work on the humble Specky. The game loses none of its scope or ambition in the transition, and while some of the graphics are blocky, the main character is animated well. On the other hand, some of the graphics are blocky, and the game is nowhere near as smooth as on the C64, and slowdown occasionally comes into play. And then there's the sound. Of course, nobody expected the game to have a full soundtrack, but none of Hulsbeck's score makes the leap to the humble Specky, and the sound effects themselves are hardly indicative, being, as they are, weedy little beeps and boops for the most part, or even left devoid of the main title theme. And yet, for all its faults, there's something genuinely compelling about this conversion. But I've rambled long enough. Onward! And And now we come to the underground lair of Morgul's minions. Bookended by two novel vertical scrolling shooter levels, Level 3-2 is a gigantic maze, populated with spiders, gun emplacements, beta blocks, ceiling sentry guns, cross-firing missiles, and projectile hurling, or vomiting in some versions, monsters that can only be described as walking compost heaps. Luckily, there's plenty of blocks around, and maybe even a few extra lives. But before that, it's a long way up, and there are plenty of obstacles to crush you if you're not careful. Hope is at hand though, as the sliders on the rails give out power-ups and have been known to drop extra lives. And I do mean drop, you've got to be pretty quick to catch them. And, after the confusion of 3-2, there's a long drop ahead of you. Fortunately, your jetpack kicks in and guides you gently to the bottom of the shaft, but not before you face down killer flying stars.
Featured system, Commodore 64.
And now, we come to the definitive 8-bit version of Turrican. The C64 version was the game that Manfred Trenz himself and the small MVV-addicted team worked on. And it shows! The graphics are smooth, colourful, and once again, absolutely stuffed with character. The sound, courtesy of the C64's justly famous SID chip, while omitting the better part of Hillspec's original score, at least makes up for it with a bouncy and hot-blooded, at least in my opinion, loading tune by one Stefan Hartwig, and a cover of Escape by Vince DiCola, which you probably recognise if you ever watched Transformers the movie, the 1986 version, over the title screen, as arranged by Ramiro Vaca. Not to mention that Hillspec's musics for levels 3-1 and 3-3 are retained, again arranged by Vaca, though at the expense of sound effects, which are suitably zappy, even if the explosions aren't as punchy as they could be. The caverns beneath Morgul's tower, a dilapidated world of spiders, doubling bats, giant protozoa, and other seemingly primal horrors. Even the blocks are fewer and further between, and the only thing keeping you from game over is an abundance of diamonds. Whereas World 3 ramped up the claustrophobia, World 4 seems a lot more open, as the spaces get bigger, and there are a few very long drops waiting for the unwary player.
Featured system, Amstrad CPC.
Another Probe design port. This version is less impressive, even though the graphics are more colourful than the Speckies, and the sound beats the Spectrum's beeps and boops with crashier explosions and punchier weapon sounds. So why is it less impressive? Because it's still nowhere near as smooth as the C64 version, and it lacks music entirely. That's not to say it's a bad game though, far from it. In fact, because of its technical impressiveness, it's actually a faithful port, losing none of the scope or level design. Anyway, enough lamenting, Morgul awaits! Morgul's Tower. This is it, folks. You've slogged and run and jumped and shot your way through slime, horror, and weird architecture to reach the Archfiend's Tower. But if you think it's all downhill from here, you're sadly mistaken. No indeed. The last two levels of the game feature gun emplacements, compost heap monsters, mushroom drones, and a blind maze. And a lot of jumping. Even the blocks are kept to a bare minimum. But if you're as tough as they say you are, Morgul's gonna have to taste your laser. This is the last world of the game, and you get some overtones of the first world with the return of the blue sky and the thrusters that keep some of the platforms afloat. Also, we get the welcome return of Hillspec's superlative score, noticeably absent during World 4. And the level design of 5-2 is pure genius, and very courageous to do in an otherwise action-oriented game.
Featured system, Atari ST.
The original team at Factor 5 ported Turrican to the Atari ST, losing none of the graphical charm of the Amiga version, nor any of the scope or size of the levels. What did change, however, was the music. Hillspec's originals were translated to the ST by Jochen Hippel, he of the Amiga 7-voice technology, and while the basic game remains unchanged, you cannot fail to notice the lower frame rate, compared to the Amiga version, that is. However, it's still Turrican at heart, and worth your time if you've ever owned an ST. And that's it, isn't it? Well, not quite. We've covered all the worlds, but not all the systems. After the success of the home computer formats, over the next few years, Accolade, under the Ballistic label, would release a port of Turrican by a team called the Code Monkeys. Let's take a look at their efforts.
Featured system, NECPC engine.
Colourful, smooth, and sounding good, there are however some minor flaws hiding underneath this version. Firstly, Hulsbeck's original score is slightly tweaked, and only one of the tunes from each world is used, which can make them a touch more repetitive. Though in defense of this, silence on World 4 is preferable to the chilling ambience of wind and random sounds. Secondly, the run button, the start button by another name, activates a switcher between the grenade and power line weapons, which takes a lot of getting used to if you're more familiar with the home computer versions. Despite these nitpicks, the Code Monkeys have managed to all but capture the spirit of the game on this system, at least in my opinion.
Featured system, Nintendo Game Boy.
It was never going to be as colourful as any other version, on a monochrome 4-grey screen, and the main sprite does lack detail. However, despite also having the start button switcher, and again, only using one tune from each world, this version manages to shine out the better for cramming the sheer scope of this game into a pocket-sized cartridge.
Featured system, Sega Mega Drive / Genesis.
This version immediately beats out its compatriots on console due to the factor of featuring all of Chris Hulsbeck's original score, albeit ever so slightly tweaked in some places. And while it still has the switcher, it's been moved to button C, leaving the start button free to pause the game. And that's the lot. Join me next time as I dive into the sequel with no equal.
On the next History of Turrican,
we take a look at Turrican 2, sometimes subtitled The Final Fight, released on Commodore 64, Sinclair ZX Spectrum, Amstrad CPC, Commodore Amiga, Atari ST, and IBM-compatible PC. Don't miss it!